In this video, we're going to talk about what Old World is, what I think about it, and whether it is worth the money currently in its early access. Old World is a 4X game, kind of like a mix between Civilization 6 and, from what I hear, Crusader Kings. Before we dive into the video, however, I want to preface that there will be a lot of comparisons to Civ 6, as this is usually the first thing that people compare it to, and I think it's a pretty good benchmark for a turn-based strategy game. In my Civ 6 Kinda Sucks video, I mentioned that even though it has a lot of systems and mechanics, most of these are pretty surface level and don't have much depth to them. Now, I did unlist that video because as my first ever video, I didn't really care about the quality, and the quality sucks. But if you want me to make that video public again, just write me a comment down below. Old World started its early access in May 2020. It is currently planned to come out of early access in about half a year or so. And so I think it's a good time to review the game and see what direction it is headed in. Old World is pretty complex with a lot of mechanics and a lot of systems. There is urban tiles, rural tiles, neutral tiles, citizens, wonders, specialists, governors, generals, courtiers, families, family members, ambassadors, chancellors, spy masters, marriages, divorces, imprisonment, assassination, counseling, influencing, ambitions, legitimacy, orders, leveling, attributes, professions, traits, aging, inheritance, choosing heirs, dying, events, other civilizations, truces, peace, war, alliances, tribes, tribal alliances, barbarians, barbarian raids, force marching, rallying, upgrading, anchoring, roads, caravans, trade deals, technologies, religion, culture, enacting laws, civics, and there is a lot more that I didn't mention because I didn't want this video to be like 3 hours long. These mechanics and systems interact with each other, which makes them quite in-depth, and depth in its mechanics is what, in my opinion, Civ 6 is really lacking. Unlike Civ 6, however, you don't have nearly as many civilizations to play. You have 7 different leaders leading 7 different nations, and you also have 5 different tribes, which you can't play, and barbarians. As you build your empire, you can befriend or make enemies out of other civilizations or tribes. Barbarians, however, will always be at war with you, and they can carry out raids to your cities. Speaking of raid, this video is sponsored by Raid Shadow Legends. No, it's not. Back to the video. The most unique and ingenious mechanic that I've encountered thus far in a strategy game is the orders. Everything in this game requires the aforementioned orders. If you want to move a unit, you need orders. If you want to improve a tile, you need orders. If you want to gift somebody gems and make your relationship better with them, you need orders. This makes it arguably one of the most important resources in the whole game. In Civ 6, you can only move your unit 1 time per turn, that's it. In Old World, however, you can move your units as much as their fatigue limit allows you to, which is usually 3. Now, of course, every single time you move them, it's going to cost you an order. As long as you have enough of them orders, however, you can be really mobile, especially since you can force march units, which at the cost of the training resource allows you to move them infinitely past their fatigue limit as long as you pay 2 orders for each of these movements. Since even scratching your butt requires orders, it doesn't make any sense to just spam out units, whether it's workers or warriors, if you don't have the infrastructure to support it. Orders per turn can be increased by building things like garrisons, having tile improvements such as pastures and camps, and finally, legitimacy. Apart from giving you orders, there's not much more to say about legitimacy. However, it can be increased through events, so let's talk about those. Events can occur randomly or be tied to previous happenings. What do I mean by previous happenings? Well, anything really.
So if my leader just randomly stubs their toe, can't they just fall into a shock and die?
No. Well, the events can be quite silly sometimes, but they usually do make sense. Let's say you get into an argument with your wife and tell her she should stop spending the national treasury on her own dresses. So now she's fucking vengeful, and after a few years an event pops up that says, "Congratulations, you just got murdered in your bed by your wife."
Bruh.
Understandable. Randomly occurring events can be something like your general and some random foreign dude arguing about who's got the bigger sword. And if you're eloquent enough, you can compliment them both on their swords and they'll be happy, yay! Now let's get to the controversial undo button. An absolute godsend of a feature. A game like this really needs an undo button, and I'm really glad that they put it in. You can just go ahead and play without having to worry about misunderstanding a small detail and ruining your whole game. Accidentally misclicked? Screw it, just undo it. Something doesn't work the way you thought it would? Just undo it. When you are new to the game, the undo button allows you to just learn by doing, which is amazing. And if you've played Civ 6, you've probably done this a number of times, where you wanted to move that settler to a safe spot, and you misclicked and accidentally moved it right outside a barbarian camp or a barbarian unit, and got it captured. And by the time you load a previous save file, you'll be 10 years older. I do see how some people might dislike this function because you can easily abuse it. If you break into the fog and see something you don't like, you can just press the undo button. But I mean, if you want to cheat in the game, it's really just up to you, nobody's forcing you to do it. Now I hate to mention orders so many times in this video, but especially as you're starting out, they can be a bit difficult to manage. Placing an improvement on a tile with trees on it is a pretty good example. Usually placing improvements only cost 1 order, however in this case they will cost you 4. This is because the worker will first cut the trees, then clear the land, and then place the improvement. In such a case, having an undo button is just really handy. Instead of using 4 orders for 1 tile, maybe you'll use 2 workers and improve 2 tiles with those 4 orders. Or maybe those 4 orders decide a battle for you, who knows? Either way, it just really enhances my game experience, so a big thumbs up from me. Old World also handles building your empire in a completely different way. I still haven't quite decided whether I like this or not, but you can settle freely. There are city sites scattered around the map which act as places that you can settle on. Clearing a barbarian or tribal encampment will also leave behind a settleable city site. Only being able to settle where the game tells you to removes the option for you to be able to pick and choose the perfect spots. Now you can take this as a limitation or as a challenge. Here are the settleable areas, take it or leave it. I personally, even though I don't like having the freedom of being able to settle wherever the f I want taken away from me, find that games this way are much more interesting, challenging, and thus more fun. Cities in Old World have urban and rural tiles. Urban tiles are randomly scattered around your city and cannot be placed unless your leader is a builder. These are required for culture buildings that depend on the culture of your city and a few other ones here and there. Rural tiles are simply any non-urban ones inside of your borders. Now, each improved tile can have a citizen assigned to it, given that you actually have one. Urban tiles can actually have 3 citizens assigned to it, each one being better than the previous one, going from apprentice to elder. So how do we get citizens or population? Well, through a resource called growth, which is different from food, and can be increased through various different things such as festivals, assigning citizens to farms, pastures, nets, and camps. Now there's many more resources than food, and unlike Civ 6, production isn't the be-all end-all. In fact, you don't even have a production stat in this game. Civilian units require growth, while military units require training, and civics help you push city projects and assign citizens to different tiles. Culture, however, will only contribute to increasing the culture level of your city. And the higher the culture level of your city, the more victory points you get. And this brings me to my next topic, the victory points. But before we get to that, I want to say that I really enjoy the empire building part of this game. Urban and rural tiles are pretty great, and you don't just rely on production and something like food. Putting down a bunch of lumber mills doesn't just magically increase your ability to produce a lot of units, but building barracks and ranges and thus increasing your training does. Okay, let's get into the victory points. Now, this is where the game frustrates me a bit. I don't like that this is a thing. In Old World, victory is decided in one of 2 ways. Either you complete 10 ambitions, which I'll get to in a bit, or you get enough victory points. There's no tangible reason for you to have won the game. Reach this abstract number of points and it is done. This feels like something a board game would have done, but in a video game you need a reason why you have achieved victory, even if it's not the most realistic. In Civ 6 you have multiple victory types, and each one insinuates that you now have a monopoly on something, and thus became unstoppable. Now, is it the most realistic thing in the world? No, but it's still better than just some abstract points. With a religious victory, for example, you need to convert most of the world to your own religion, and thus get them under your influence, and congrats, you have won the game. You have a score victory in Civ 6 only if the game drags on for too long and you ran out of turns. If you run out of the given 200 turns in Old World, I'm completely fine with winning based on score. But when you just need points to win every single game, it just feels a bit robotic. Building wonders gives you victory points in Old World, so my question is, how did building, let's say, the Colossus help me win this game in any way? It gave me culture and orders.
Oh fuck yeah, orders.
But there's no direct connection to me winning the game and building the Colossus. Ambitions are goals that the game sets for you that you can achieve and give legitimacy if you do so. Upon completing 10 increasingly challenging ambitions, you can also win the game. It can go from settle 4 cities to capture 6 enemy cities to something like have the biggest military, which is really fucking hard, by the way, on the hardest difficulty, because some dude on the other side of the continent will just randomly have accumulated a bajillion units. Let's get into the tech tree. The game is called Old World and it plays in the Old World. Coming from Civ 6, you might be a bit shocked that this game only goes up until the late medieval era. However, one thing that always bothered me in Civ 6 was the pacing. On normal to fast speeds, the eras just went by too quickly. If your unique unit could only be built in like the ancient or classical era, you would be only seeing it for like 20 turns. And on slower speeds, just nothing gets done. Conversely, the pace in Old World is quite enjoyable. It's also interesting how it's much more difficult to beeline certain technologies because of how researching works. Let's say there's 10 available technologies that you can research. You'll draw only 4 of these as cards and choose one. If you wanted to get one of the techs from the other 6, well, you gotta hope that it shows up next time. This semi-random selection of technologies makes it so that every single game you play is slightly different. Sometimes you're able to research forestry as the 2nd or 3rd technology. However, sometimes you just go half the game without having archers because your people apparently don't know how to chop trees in a renewable way. And so out of forest, out of luck, having a scholar as a leader who can redraw text can come in quite handy here. Old World has some interesting strategic combat. Orders can limit you or allow you to do some crazy things, and every unit has a specific trait. So in Civ 6 it's more of like a rock paper scissors system. Cavalry beats infantry, anti-cavalry beats cavalry, and infantry beats anti-cavalry. So as a contrast, let's take a look at some of the units in Old World. On top of having an advantage against cavalry, the attacks of spearmen will also go through the unit it is attacking. Axemen do damage in an arc in front of them, and war elephants can make the enemies flee in terror, while also having the ability to rout their enemies. If you just killed an enemy and routed them, you can attack again. Now every unit in the game can receive promotions, and every unit has the same pool of promotions, but you only have the option of 4 randomized ones. Sound familiar? Every unit can also be assigned a general. These can boost the strength of the unit they are, being a general of, depending on their traits and stats. If the general is a hero, they are automatically immune to critical hits, and each point in bravery will increase their damage. Warfare feels quite tense and engaging, as you need to make every single order count. Because you can move units multiple times a turn, you can make big and surprising moves, but so can the AI. If you capture a city, you need to keep a unit there for at least 3 turns or higher depending on its culture level, making it much harder to blitz through your enemies as you're leaving behind a trail of units. Oh, and you also don't have the ultra annoying and typical for Civ, the game tells you your attack is going to kill, but ultimately it doesn't. Another thing that I kind of like over Civ is that the AI feels much smarter, or at least scarier. It will often pull units from the fog of war and one-shot your own. It's nothing too revolutionary, but it feels much better than the AI in Civ 6. And it's really hard to feel safe with only 2 ranged units defending your whole empire. The other civilizations are a serious threat, and they don't just announce that they're attacking you by placing troops right next to your border for like 10 turns, or just straight up denouncing you. Although the AI does have its odd behaviors here and there. Now, I personally am not that big of a fan of naval combat in these kinds of games, and here the AI doesn't seem to be either. You will rarely get attacked by sea, and if you do, the ships usually just retreat if they get hit once. I have a hunch that the AI is programmed this way, because much like Civ 6, on higher difficulties it gets a bunch of resources and technologies shoved down its throat. And because there's an element of luck in drawing technologies, which I'm a fan of by the way, you might not even have the possibility to build a navy before the AI has like 10 ships on your border. Now I know it's hard to program an AI for this kind of game where there's just so much to take into account. However, scaling the difficulty by giving the AI an unfair advantage just leads the game into only one direction, and that is survive the early game, and if you've done that, then well, you won the game, congrats. After you're done playing catch up, most of the game's tension goes away. It would be much more interesting if you were playing like a 6-player chess match on this giant board with so many different things and so much possibility for luck and random events to occur. Here's a scenario that happened to me, and unfortunately I lost the footage of it, but just imagine it, okay? So I'm playing as Rome, and I'm stuck in this mountain valley surrounded by other civilizations, and I'm like, oh crap, I'm screwed. So then about 20 turns in, I have 2 cities, but I desperately need more. And to my surprise, my southern neighbor, Persia, is losing victory points rapidly. It turns out Egypt from the other side of the mountain is just absolutely demolishing him. And I'm like, this is my opportunity. This is my time to shine and stab Persia in the back. So I compare the strength of our militaries, and even though I only have like 4 warriors, it's still telling me Persia is much weaker than you. And so off we go into Persia's capital. And guess what? He only has 2 units defending it. Now I'm not a mathematician, but I'm pretty sure 4 beats 2. So my 4 warriors kill one of his, and reinforcements from my side are coming in. This is looking good, boys. I'm going to capture this capital with so much nice stuff in it. But what's this? Not only is Persia killing my units 3 times faster with the same units that I'm using, but he's also producing new ones every single turn. It's like he's in the industrial era and has a warrior factory going on. Warriors that for some unforsaken reason are just 10 times stronger than mine. So my scrawny loser warriors get wiped out by his buff Chad warriors, and I go cry in a corner. So I found a weakness in the enemy, a chink in their armor, and I tried to exploit it, but got absolutely punished for it, because the AI is just stronger than you for reasons. Here are my closing thoughts on Old World so far. This game has a unique take on the 4X turn-based strategy genre and definitely stands out in its unique approach and interesting features. Since it's still in early access, a lot of things are clearly still in development, so you will see a lot of T-posing, weird visuals, and some placeholder art, but it's perfectly playable at this point. Well, it's not just playable, it's actually quite enjoyable. And definitely has that one more turn factor that Civ 6 is so famed for. In fact, when trying to record a short clip for this video, I often got distracted and ended up playing for 1 or 2 hours. And since I started working on this video, there have already been many updates to the game, which is one of the upsides of early access. It's always fun to watch new things get added, especially when it's for free. Currently, this game is 33 euros, and so I find it quite impressive just how much went into this game, and is going into this game. Something I didn't even mention are the graphics. They actually look pretty beautiful, and you have little details like mountaintops being visible from far away into the fog of war. I would love to see victory points being replaced by different victory types, and a few systems here and there need some work, but overall I really enjoy this game as of right now. And so I'm very curious to see how this game is gonna develop, especially for the full release, which is supposed to be planned in about a half a year or so. So is Old World worth the money? My vote would be yes.